All right. Welcome to the Female Phoenix. On this episode, we have an amazing special guest. Please welcome.
Hi, my name is Lois Strachan, and I want to chat to you today about the concept of moving forwards after facing challenges.
Excellent. We're so happy to have you here today, Lois. Now, Lois, you have a very specific challenge that you have overcome throughout your lifetime. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Well, I think my story really goes back to before the specific topic that you're wanting to chat about.
Mm-hmm.
When I was 6 years old, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Now, that's not the lifestyle diabetes, it's actually the autoimmune condition that is managed through taking insulin injections and managed a lot more closely than type 2 diabetes, which is generally managed by diet and tablets and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Type 1 diabetes requires fairly serious medical interventions. What I didn't know back then when I was 6 years old was that diabetes had some long-term possible medical conditions. And just looking at the World Health Organization, about 55% of people who have had diabetes for around 12 to 15 years, and that's both type 1 and type 2 diabetes, but about 55% of people develop some form of eye problems,
Oh,
problems with
wow.
their eyesight. And in my case, after about a year of laser surgery and 6 surgical operations, 3 on each eye,
Oh, my.
I was told that I was going to be permanently blind and totally blind. And that's quite tough to adjust to when you're 21 years old. But,
Yes.
sitting in the hospital just after receiving the diagnosis, I made a very conscious choice. I realized that I could either go home and give up, in which case I would be letting my blindness control my future and the rest of my life. And in fact, I'd probably sit in the corner and be angry and depressed and totally dependent on other people. Or I could choose to take back control of my life and go out and see what was still possible for me as a blind person living in a sighted world. And I think there were a lot of factors that helped me make that decision. And I've been incredibly fortunate that I've had the resources I needed
Mm.
to make that decision. But I've learned so many skills along the way that have been so helpful for me just to overcome the everyday challenges of living as a blind person. And in fact, they're not all challenges. I've got a wonderful life. I'm really excited by the things that I do. So I can't say that they're all challenges.
That's a wonderful outlook. I feel like so many people who would be put in that situation would take longer than you did to push past the negatives. That just says a lot about your character and who you are as a person, that you are able to kind of reposition your thoughts and think, okay, this is an opportunity to grow.
I think it was largely due to my personality. I've
Hmm.
always been someone who's loved solving problems. I've loved doing picture puzzles when I was a child and word puzzles and things like that. And I've always been solutions focused. So whenever a problem came up, I'd immediately link to the phase of saying, okay, so I've got this challenge. How do I solve it? And I know a lot of people don't have that resource, that ability, but it really has made such a difference to my life. And we all go through it's the grief cycle, the change cycle. There is a process we need to work through to adjust to any change that we face in life. And those getting through that process takes a period of time, and it takes a different amount of time for each one of us. And that's okay.
Yes,
And I
I
was
think
just
getting to the
fortunate
place
enough.
where you believe it's
Yeah.
okay, that's tough.
Yeah. And I was just fortunate that I linked almost immediately into this. Okay, so I'm in this state. How do I move forwards?
Yes. Wow. I love you have a quote that I have started to implement into my own life, which is attitude is an asset. And in one of the recordings that I have done a little research about you, you said that that came on as something that really came to the forefront after the loss of sight. Were there other moments in your life since your blindness that you thought, okay, this has really taught me this that I might not have experienced if I did have sight?
I think there's a lot, and they're not all negative things. I do things in a different way. I do the same things that a sighted person does. I just do them in, I use different tools and different techniques. And it just gives me a different perspective. Travel is one of those, housework, cooking, deciding what to wear, applying makeup. All of those are things that I do just as a sighted person would do them. I just do them a little bit differently, mostly using my other senses. And I think that I don't believe my other senses have improved since losing my sight. I do think that I pay more attention to them. And particularly if I'm talking about travel and things like that, I often say to people that next time they're traveling, okay, I know travel is a bit of a bad one at this time with the current situation with the pandemic. But when you're doing something, try seeing what your other senses can tell you as well, because it just gives extra dimensions to the things we're doing. It's just a
And
different way of doing things.
better appreciation, I'm sure, too. I feel like just myself listening to what you say, I find myself just trying to absorb and be present with my senses. And I imagine that when one is not present, uh, you find creative ways to enjoy the moment. And I'm thinking you have so many accomplishments, Lois. You have written books. Tell us a little bit about the books that you've written to kind of help us understand what your life is like.
I've published 5 books so far. I'm working on the 6th book at the moment, which I hope to be done with the writing phase by the end of next month.
Wow.
Of those 5 books that I've written so far, 4 are illustrated children's books aimed for readers between the ages of 3 and 8 years old. And they really describe the life of a visually impaired mouse character named Missy Mouse, and how she goes about her life of living an ordinary life and exploring the world around her using her other senses. And it's been really amazing to see how children have responded to the books, because children have a very different approach to difference, to disability. I think we learn more caution, more socialization, more reticence about asking questions. Young children are just going to ask questions if they have
Yes.
them. And that is such fun to work with children of that sort of age, to talk about diversity, to talk about disability, about inclusion. And I hope the books start those types of conversations so that younger children and their parents can chat about them.
I think
And
that's
those came out,
great. Yeah.
yeah, they were fun and they're exciting. And I worked with an amazing illustrator who really brought the books to life, and she did an amazing job. And then the second book is a narrative nonfiction, or a memoir. And it's really my story going from the time when I lost my sight, describing some of the tools and techniques that I use to just accomplish everyday tasks, and also sharing stories of the things that I've done since losing my sight. And I brought out, just recently launched the second edition of that book, and it's called A Different Way of Seeing: A Blind Woman's Journey of Living an Ordinary Life in an Extraordinary Way. And I had such fun writing that one and then updating it for the second edition. So it talks
Oh,
about pretty much everything, all the things that I do in my life.
Oh, I can't wait to get my hands on that. And I hope our listeners, other female Phoenix listeners are, that is in their Amazon cart right now. That is a must have book. And if you have children at home, female Phoenix listeners, make sure that you are getting Missy Mouse so that you can create that conversation at the dinner table as well. Now, Lois, I have to ask, I imagine that, going through this, you might have encountered oversympathy or over scrutiny in the world of business because you are such a powerhouse of a woman who doesn't let limitations hold her back. Did you ever encounter those feelings of oversympathy, like, oh no, Lois, it's okay, I can do this for you?
I do, and I have to admit, I'm going to come across as being incredibly arrogant when I say this, but I don't let myself be worried about other people's responses to my blindness. What's important to me is that I'm okay with it, and I can use my comfort with my own blindness to chat to people, to talk to people, to raise awareness, say there is no need to pity me or
Right.
to be over sympathetic because I have the same abilities as a person who's sighted. I'm just a normal person who
Absolutely.
does things in a slightly different way.
Mhm. Oh, I love that. I like hearing your responses because I think a woman who's currently going through something similar, or maybe has just entered this phase in her life where maybe it's not sight, maybe it's another disability of sorts, and just doesn't know what the next step might be. Do you have any advice for a woman who might have been where you were at age 21?
I think it's really important to know what resources you have at your disposal
Mhm.
and to know what resources are available to you. Also, I think it's important to reach out and get information from the right people, the people who know. Um, there are few general practitioners, general family doctors or GPs who have the knowledge of the resources that are available. And there are some incredibly good um, sources of support, of training to help people. And I think there's kind of three resources that I think are the most important. One is your support system, your family, your friends,
Mhm.
because yes, going through a change is tough. It's incredibly hard. And there are times you're going to take a lot of strain. And I think having a strong network or support system around you who can just be there for you, they don't even need to say anything or do anything in particular, but just knowing that they're there is very important. The second is those kinds of professional support organizations. Find the ones that work for you and will help you achieve the processes, the goals, the targets that you are wanting to achieve.
Mhm.
But above all, realize that you have to be your very first strongest resource
Oh, I love that.
because, you know, no change, no improvement, no growth is going to come unless you yourself have the ability to reach out and move towards that growth. And yes, there will be times it'll be hard to do that, but just know that find something to pull you forwards and take it one step at a time and be kind enough to yourself to forgive yourself if you don't always move forward in huge steps. It's okay.
I love that advice, especially in the wave of 2020 when a lot of us have created goals, and this has been a tough year all around. And moving forward in the growth that I think we all thought we were going to reach, it's okay. It's okay if you don't reach every goal in the time period you think. What is your next
I
goal, Lois?
I actually I'm not certain. Okay. I am working on an audio version of my book. I have a remarkable narrator who I've known since I was 3 years old, and we're working on that together, and we're about almost halfway through the book at the moment. So that's a big goal. And I've got all sorts of smaller goals The second one is, I think, um, the writing of this new book that I'm working on. Beyond that, I'm happy to wait and see how the year unfolds, because I had 3 big goals last year, all of which I've had to reassess.
Mhm.
And that taught me a lot about patience. It taught me a lot about adjusting to change, to rethinking events, finding different ways of doing things. So I'm not being too clear or too determined to have specific goals this year until I get more of an idea of how the year is unfolding.
I think that is the best route to take. I like that.
I don't think we have an alternative right now.
Right, adjusting and being flexible, that's all we can do.
Yeah.
I have to ask though, is there someone in your life that inspires you? Who is a role model or someone you look up to?
Oh my, there are so many people that I have been inspired by through the years. And, people from all over the place. But I think the first 2 people who probably inspired me most of all were my mother and my grandmother, each of whom lived with a disability themselves. My mother was in a wheelchair due to multiple sclerosis, and my grandmother had developed a hearing impairment as she grew older. And both of them were such strong women, and they gave me such great role models for the situation that I faced when I lost my sight.
I am blown away by that. I That is a fun fact that I did not know. Um, and I think again, I am in awe that you are here with us today and sharing your story with our listeners, but also saying that you had 2 other women in your life that showed you that, okay, we have this hurdle, but we're going to get over it together and we're going to be pushing past and, we're going to create a great life. I love that. Ah,
I think we
wow.
all do.
It takes me a second. My jaw's on the floor. And so got to pick it up for a second. I was just thinking, if you could go back to your 21-year-old self and tell her a piece of advice and tell her where you are now, what would you say to young Lois?
I'm not really sure, because I'm not really certain she would have listened to much advice. At that time, I suspect she was too busy going through things. I suppose all I would say is, it'll be okay. You'll figure it out.
Oh, yeah. I think sometimes just going through the experience is a powerful tool in itself, like you say.
Yeah, it is.
Now, before I let you go, I have to ask you about Fiji. I tell our listeners who Fiji is.
Fiji is my current guide dog. She's my third guide dog. She is currently 6 years old. We've been working for just under 5 years, depending on when this podcast is released. It was end of February will be 5 years. And she is my independence. She's a companion. She is also just a normal, everyday Labrador who is naughty when she's allowed to be, but when she's working, she has such laser focus. She is a remarkable guide dog who's just given me so much independence and so much joy, and is just an absolute treasure.
Oh, I love dogs are truly a gift, and it sounds like you have Fiji, you have other wonderful humans in your life who also support you. Who else other than Fiji are who is supporting you?
I've been married for many years now. I think it's 21 years. And
Congratulations!
thank you. I have a very wonderful husband who married me despite the fact that I was blind. And I say that with my tongue very firmly in my cheek. But I do think that it is a factor for a sighted person to be aware of when, selecting a marriage partner. He had to consider what my blindness and my diabetes, what the implications of those might be for him.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really special thing, that he was very happy to just accept those and say, well, we'll figure it out, which, as you can see, is one of those other factors in my life. We'll always find a way. There's a solution for everything. I talk about my can-do attitude. That
Yes.
means if ever I encounter a problem, I approach it from the perspective that I will be able to find a solution. I just have to know how.
And you
So
quoted the idea that, um, it's your attitude of, if you believe you cannot, you will not. And if you believe you can, you will. And I think that if you were to have a life motto, what would that be it?
pretty much.
Yeah.
I don't want to. There's so much in my life that I can do. I'm not going to worry about the very few things that I can't. So I
Right.
think that's one of them. But I think that idea of where if you think you can or you can't, you're going to be right, I think is very important to me. Because if you're uncertain about whether or not you can do something and it's a challenge and it seems a bit difficult, the brain kind of goes, well, maybe I can't, and oh, therefore I can't. And I
That's so
never want to
interesting.
get to that default.
Right. Right.
I always want my default to be, of course I can. I just have to figure out how.
You're very creative too. I feel like when there's a hurdle, you think of all the prepositions over, under, around, beneath. How am I going to do this?
Well,
Um,
straight through.
straight through many times, just push all
Yeah.
through. Well, I think that the world is impacted by your story in many ways. Women who are listening hear a strong woman who is determined. Listeners of every gender and background can hear that you can push past any excuse in a creative way and be extremely successful. If you're listening to this podcast, I just want to highlight some of Lois's incredible distinguished honors, if you will. And the
Uh-oh.
list the list could go on and on and on. Just to highlight a few that I was blown away by is you have many degrees in many different categories regarding the arts and classical civilizations, which I think is neat. Practitioner of coaching skills and human resource management. But then she goes on to also have awards with prestigious Tributes Excellence Award with women with disabilities who have excelled in their fields, especially with education and literacy. And also the Goodwill Ambassador, which I hear is South Africa's largest fundraiser for persons living with disabilities. Lois, the list could go on, and these were just to highlight a few. But our listeners who are hearing this story and thinking, if Lois can do it, I need to do it too. What is the biggest takeaway you would want to leave with our listeners?
Understand what makes you shine and use that as a way to build your resilience, your strength, and your courage when you face tough times.
Excellent. Lois, it has been such an honor having you on the Female Phoenix today, and I'm looking forward to following your journey to see all of the new journeys and chapters that you accomplish. If someone wanted to follow along, is there a way that on social media or your website that they could see what you're up to next?
I think the best way is through my website, which is loisstrachan.com, and that's LOISSTRACHAN. So loisstrachan.com. I am also on Facebook. I have a Facebook page called Lois Strachan Speaker, and I am on Twitter at Lois Strachan ZA. I'm not yet on Instagram, but that's on my list of things that I want to do in the foreseeable future.
There you go. That's the next step. Well, Lois, this
One
has
of the
been a
next
pleasure.
steps.
This has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me, Lauren. It's been wonderful to speak to you. And if my story can make a difference to just one other person, then I think that I've done something of value. So thank you.
Thank you.